parents bought a house for my sister using the money I had saved for them, but now they can't make ends meet because I've cut them off financially. I'm writing this because, at 33, I feel financially exploited by my parents. My parents, dad is 68 and mom is 65, worked hard all their lives and did the best they could to raise my sister, 29, and me. They gave us everything they could. We weren't rich, but they made sure we never lacked the essentials. They provided us with a good education and a comfortable life. We had a decent upbringing, but as we became adults, the family dynamics started to shift, especially when it came to my sister. Kayla had always been the golden child. As we grew up, she was pampered, spoiled, and doted on, while I was expected to be responsible and independent. My parents always made excuses for her behavior, no matter how selfish or demanding it was. They'd say things like, "She's just sensitive," or "She'll get over it." But Kayla never changed. Instead, she just became more demanding over time. During her teenage years, she started asking for more. First it was clothes, then a car, and later, money for expensive vacations. My parents always felt obligated, even when Kayla got married at 21 to a guy who was just as demanding as she was. My parents financed her lavish wedding. When I objected, they argued that Kayla didn't go to college and thus saved them the cost of tuition. So they had to invest in her wedding. I asked why both of them didn't work and fund the wedding, but how could they? The guy was only 24 and, of course, financially unstable. It was nothing short of a child marriage. Even though my parents were dipping into their savings to fund her wedding, Kayla never treated it as a favor. She acted as if her parents were duty-bound to do it for her. Meanwhile, I was expected to pay for my own college and had to take out loans, which I'm still paying off. But I didn't complain. I assumed that was just how things were. As the years passed, I became more financially successful. I worked hard, made smart investments, and eventually landed a well-paying job. My parents retired when Dad turned 63, and they were partly relying on their pension and partly on the monthly financial support I provided. They claimed to have some savings for a rainy day. I doubted that they actually had any, given that Kayla never missed an opportunity to draw money from them. I never minded helping them because I wanted to give back to the people who raised me. They needed help with bills, medical expenses, and general living costs, and I was happy to contribute. While I was helping with the day-to-day expenses, I was always worried about their retirement life. Their savings weren't substantial, and with life expectancies on the rise, I knew they could run out of funds. I was single and had few responsibilities, so a few $1,000s here and there didn't hurt. But eventually, I would have a family, and I wasn't sure how much responsibility that would bring. So I set up a savings account specifically for them. Every month, I put part of my paycheck into that account to make sure they'd be comfortable in their later years. I told them about it, and they appreciated the gesture. They have access to that account. I also deposit my monthly allowance there. They use only a portion and save the rest. A few months ago, Kayla called me with what she called urgent news. She was pregnant with her third child. I congratulated her because I was genuinely happy for her. But then the conversation took a turn. She and her husband had been looking at a new, bigger house in an upscale neighborhood. It was way beyond their means, but Kayla insisted they needed it because of the new baby on the way. Then came the bombshell. Mom and Dad thought it would be a great idea if I could help them buy the house. I was even more shocked to learn that my parents had apparently decided on this idea in their heads, that I should buy a house for my sister. As if providing them support and saving up a retirement fund wasn't enough. I politely told her that I couldn't possibly buy a house for her. She insisted, but I reminded her that she and her husband were working, so they should be able to handle it on their own. Kayla didn't take it well. Later, I called my parents in a huff. They explained that they hadn't come up with the idea. Kayla had approached them, saying she wanted me to buy her a house, and they hadn't discouraged her from asking me. They said, "Well, we thought this was something for siblings to sort out, so we didn't get involved. I reiterated that I wasn't going to make an extravagant purchase, whether it was for her or for them. My parents said that was fine, and I thought that ended the conversation. But it didn't. 2 days later, my parents invited me to dinner, which wasn't unusual, so I didn't think much of it. However, when I arrived, I realized the dinner was just a pretext. As soon as I sat down, they started pressuring me to help Kayla. Their argument was that Kayla needed a bigger house, that the kids deserved to grow up in a good neighborhood, and that, as her older brother, it was my duty to help her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The very people I'd been supporting for years were asking me to drain my savings to buy my sister a luxury she couldn't afford on her own. I just couldn't do it. I had my own priorities, and while I was willing to help Kayla with smaller things, buying her a house was out of the question. My parents didn't take my refusal well. They tried to manipulate me by saying, "Honey, your sister lives in a small, shabby apartment with 2 kids, and the third is on the way. The neighbors are hippies and sketchy. Don't you care about your nephew's or niece's safety? We've been expecting you to gift her a house for years, but since you didn't do it on your own, we have to ask you now." They said this as if it were some sort of unspoken agreement that I had to take care of my sister's family. Naturally, I lost my temper and told them that she should have considered her financial situation before bringing those kids into the world, and even before that, when she got married so young to a man without stable income. It wasn't my problem if she hadn't learned her lesson from raising 2 kids in poverty and now bringing a third. The discussion got heated, and I felt cornered, but I stood my ground. I told them I had already helped enough and was willing to lend a few dollars if needed, but not this. In the end, I left the dinner halfway through because the conversation had lost all sense. They weren't willing to understand my point of view. After that night, things became tense. My parents started calling me less often, and when they did, the conversations were cold. I know I haven't done anything wrong, but their reactions make me feel like the bad guy. I know my sister is in a tough financial spot, but would I really be the villain if I refused to do this? Before continuing, don't forget to subscribe. New stories every day. Update 1. You won't believe what happened a month ago. I noticed something weird. The retirement account I'd been saving for my parents suddenly emptied out. All the money I had set aside for them was gone. I panicked, thinking the account might have been hacked or scammed. I called my parents immediately and asked if they'd lost their debit card or shared the details with someone. Mom answered the phone, and when I mentioned the theft, she was evasive. I realized something was off. I asked if she knew anything about it, and she denied it. However, when I pressed and said I was going to involve the police, she admitted that she had lent the money to my aunt, her sister, who needed it for a medical emergency. I'm not particularly close with my aunt, but I know she's had health issues in the past. So I believed her. Still, something didn't add up about why Mom had lied in the first place. I let it go for a bit. A week later, while thinking about the money I was going to deposit into that account this month, I figured I should ask my aunt since I hadn't talked to her in a while. To my surprise, she said that Mom hadn't been in contact with her for months. When I mentioned the money, she was completely confused. She had no idea what I was talking about and assured me she hadn't asked my parents for anything. That's when I knew what had happened with my money. I went home immediately and asked them straight up, "You gave the money to Kayla, didn't you?" Mom tried to dodge the question, saying, "No, we gave it to your aunt." I got angry and told her to stop lying, and that I had already talked to my aunt. Then Mom broke down and confessed that they had given the money to Kayla so she could buy the house she wanted. My worst fears came true and I lost it. They're completely crazy, giving their retirement money to their stupid daughter. How are they going to cover their expenses in old age, do you think? She started crying and said, "We thought we had you." I yelled, "You got me? I'm some kind of millionaire who prints money in my backyard. What if I marry a woman who doesn't want to work and I have to support her? What about the responsibilities I'll have when I have kids? How am I supposed to handle all that?" Mom didn't have an answer, but Dad jumped in to defend her. Well, we had to do it because you refused to help. You turned down buying a house for Kayla. Remember, son, you can abandon your sister, but we can't abandon our daughter. She needs a house more than we need that money for retirement. I was stunned by their response. Oh, really? She needs the house more than you need the money for retirement? So I'm basically a fool for having lived frugally for the last 10 years and saved this fund for you. To say I felt discouraged would be an understatement. I was furious. All the money I had saved for them, their safety net, was gone. It was all spent on a luxury my sister couldn't afford on her own. Yes, a basic need, a house, is nothing short of a luxury for Kayla because she can't even afford an apartment in a good neighborhood. I told them what they'd done was incredibly irresponsible and that they had betrayed my trust. They tried to defend themselves, saying they did it for the family, that they had no other choice, and that I forced their hand by refusing to help. The manipulation was intense. They twisted the situation so that it looked like I was the one who abandoned them, as if I were the villain for not bowing to their will. I couldn't believe it. I'd been supporting them for years, and now they were making me out to be the bad guy. I was on the verge of a breakdown. I collapsed on the couch, not knowing what to do. Mom came over to calm me down, trying her emotional tricks to make me feel better, telling me that the house was scheduled to be finalized in a week and that now Kayla couldn't withdraw the funds. I thought, wait, the house hasn't even been bought yet, right? The poor guy in me thought I might somehow save the money I'd worked so hard to earn. I tried to explain how important that retirement money was, giving several examples of relatives and neighbors who ended up dying in poverty due to a lack of funds. They were partially convinced but clearly worried, or maybe even scared, and asked Kayla to return the money. I said I would do it instead. Mom called Kayla, asking her to come over because there was something urgent to discuss. When she arrived, I tried to make her see that buying a house with our parents' safety net wasn't a good idea. Instead, they should save up and buy something within their budget. But she's a demanding woman. How could she let go of money she had already taken? She stood her ground, saying she wasn't going to give it back. In fact, she said she had already made the payment, so there was no way to reverse it. Our discussion turned into a nasty fight. I held firm, telling my parents that unless they withdrew the money and returned it to the retirement account, I would cut them off financially. No more help with bills, no more money for groceries, nothing. I didn't want to do it, but I felt I had no other choice. They needed to understand the consequences of their actions. Kayla jumped in to rescue them, assuring them not to worry and that she'd take care of them if I cut them off. She said it so casually and dismissively, as if it were no big deal. But the worst part was that my parents clung to her words like a lifeline. I knew very well that wasn't true. Kayla had never been responsible in her life. She was used to receiving, not giving. I warned them they were making a huge mistake, but they wouldn't listen. They were convinced Kayla would help them, and nothing I said could change their minds. I can't imagine how naive they must be. Kayla and her husband can barely make ends meet. How are they going to take care of our parents? Sure, moving to their own house from the apartment might save them on rent, but is that money really enough to care for our parents? Besides, they'd have a mortgage to pay. The money my parents gave her would barely cover 40% of the price, but she's delusional. And it's not just her. Her husband has zero financial planning skills. The confrontation left me dizzy, and I finally stormed out in a rage, saying that from now on, they shouldn't count on me for any financial help. It's been a couple of weeks since then. I was hoping for some kind of miracle and that they'd withdraw the money, but nothing has changed. Kayla is now the proud owner of her fancy house in an upscale neighborhood, and she can't stop showing it off on social media. Update 2. First of all, since many have asked, I need to clarify that I can't sue. Well, I could, but my chances of winning are nil since the money was a gift for my parents. There wasn't much I could do. It was in a joint account, and they could use it whenever and however they wanted. There's no contract stating that the money was earmarked for a specific purpose. They decided to waste it on my sister, and these are the consequences. Believe me, I've spoken with 3 lawyers and they all told me the same thing. We could go to court, but at the end of the day, you're just going to keep wasting your money. Back to the update. Things happened just as I predicted. Kayla didn't hold up her end, and my parents came crawling back to me. As I promised, I cut them off, not just financially, but in every way, something I hadn't mentioned before. The truth is, our relationship is now damaged. I felt terrible and conflicted for weeks, but I knew I had to stand my ground. I couldn't keep enabling their poor decisions, especially when they chose my sister's whims over their own financial security. Kayla was on cloud 9 after buying the house. Sure, in the first few months she covered some of the monthly expenses for our parents. I knew that wouldn't last, but I hoped I was wrong for her sake. However, it didn't take long for everything to start falling apart. Kayla and her husband quickly realized that the numbers just weren't adding up. As expected, she doesn't have a stable job, and while her husband's job is steady, it isn't well paid. The mortgage, bills, utilities, the kids' education, and childcare costs all started piling up. Within 6 months, they were struggling to make ends meet. The idea of using the rent money to cover other expenses suddenly fell apart. They soon maxed out their credit cards and ended up asking our parents to manage on their own because they could barely afford a decent meal. Our parents had saved a little from the money I used to lend them. They spent it, and when it ran out, they started calling me again. First, with subtle hints about how tough things were, then with more direct money requests. I felt terrible for them, but I stuck to my decision. This was exactly what I'd warned them about. After talking with them a few times, I began ignoring their calls and messages. I don't feel good about it, but I have to stand firm for my own sanity. I know I'm being fair and reasonable, but it still hurts to see them suffer. Update 3. There's been a lot of drama. Where do I even start? About a week ago, I got a call from Mom. At first, I ignored it, but she insisted, and I felt it was urgent. I answered, and she sounded desperate, her voice trembling. She told me that Kayla had sold the house and moved out of town. I asked, so what? After I cut off the financial support, our parents went to see Kayla and gave her an ultimatum. Either she paid the monthly allowance that I used to provide, or she returned the money they'd lent her to buy the house. Kayla, who should be called Karen at this point, argued with our parents, but this time they didn't back down. Eventually, she agreed to pay them a monthly allowance. A month later, Mom contacted Kayla to ask for the money. Kayla delayed a couple of weeks and then suddenly disappeared. Her phone was off and she'd blocked all of us on social media. When our parents went to her house, it was locked up and had some fresh paint jobs. They investigated and discovered that the house now belonged to someone else. Evidently, Kayla had sold it and left to avoid paying back the money. Mom cried, saying that they regretted making the wrong decision and didn't know what to do. It was heartbreaking to hear that they were in trouble. They wanted me to help them financially like I had before. I wanted to help, but I was reluctant because I felt exploited. I told them I needed some time to think since I had other priorities. I've been dating a girl for 5 months now, and I think I'm ready to take the relationship to the next level. We're talking about moving in together, finding a spacious house, and maybe even getting married next year. All of that involves money. A week later, I went to see them. They repeated the same story about how Kayla had vanished. I reminded them that I had warned them about this and that I'd tried to protect them from this situation. My dad tried to argue that it was my responsibility, but I told him that responsibility is mutual. They chose to trust Kayla over me, and now they have to deal with the consequences of that choice. I was shocked by how entitled they felt to my money, as if there were some unspoken rule that I was supposed to cover their expenses no matter what they did to me. They tried to manipulate me emotionally, saying that they raised me and that it was now my duty to repay them. I told them, I agree, and I tried to pay you back, but you really screwed up. Now, I'm done being a cash cow. They refused to admit that I was right, that they shouldn't have betrayed my trust and acted behind my back to help Kayla. Instead, they gaslighted me, saying that none of this would have happened if I had bought the house for Kayla. I realized it wasn't worth arguing further and that it was best to distance myself for my own sanity. I said, "You shouldn't bite the hand that feeds you. You made your choice, and now you have to live with the consequences," and then I left their house. It's been a few days since that conversation, and I haven't heard from my parents since. I know they're struggling financially, and it hurts more than I can put into words. I never wanted things to get to this point, but I had to take a stand. I had to show them that their actions have consequences. They spent their whole life enabling Kayla, and I don't think that will ever change. As for Kayla, I have no idea where she is now. We haven't spoken since she abandoned our parents, and honestly, I don't care. Update 4. I'm posting this update because everyone's been asking for one. It's been a while since the last one, almost 2 years, and a lot has happened in my life. Though I doubt my parents and sister care as much about my updates as I do. I'll give a brief update on my life first, then get to the important stuff. I got married and moved into a house with my wife. Don't worry, I learned from my mistakes. This time I signed a prenuptial agreement. As for my parents, my dad went back to work. Yes, he came out of retirement to earn more money. He could spend all day fishing or doing whatever he wanted, but he chose to squander that opportunity by helping my sister, which only reinforced her behavior even more. And that's not the worst part of my dad's situation, there's more. My mom is working, so to speak. Although she doesn't have a formal job, she's taking on sewing gigs and that sort of thing, which gives her some extra income. This is because my dad's work isn't as good as it used to be, so their earnings aren't enough, especially thanks to my sister. Yes, I have news about my sister too. We now know that she's moved to another state. We found out shortly after she sold the house since the money from the sale clearly wasn't going to last her long. With the expenses from the sale, the mortgage, and other debts, it barely lasted her a few months. That's why she got back in touch with my parents, and as expected, she asked them for money again. But since it's no longer my money, it's coming from my dad's earnings, I'm no longer bothered by it. The last thing I heard, a little over a year ago, is that my parents were still helping Kayla. That's when we stopped talking with them. We only spoke sporadically after my last update, and that completely stopped when they began helping Kayla again. Anyway, it doesn't bother me anymore because it's not my money they're using. I won't lie. I'd love to get my money back, but even if my parents work for the rest of their lives, they'll never be able to return it to me. And neither will my sister. So, I cut off all contact with them and haven't heard a thing since. Neither my parents nor Kayla showed up at my wedding. But that's what I know has happened with my family, at least until I stopped speaking with them. If anything has changed since then, I have no way of knowing. Update 5. It's been 2 months since I last posted here, and I've discovered something new that might interest some people. My sister is getting divorced. My aunt, who doesn't really talk much with my parents, if at all, still has my sister on her social media. She told me last week when I called to wish her a happy birthday that my sister had posted something about her divorce. There aren't many details beyond the announcement, but honestly, I'm not surprised. That marriage was doomed from the start. First, because of the financial issues, which always add extra strain to any relationship. And second, and more importantly, because they have 2 poorly raised kids, and sooner or later, something like this was bound to happen. As I said, I don't have all the details, but I wouldn't be shocked if one of them was unfaithful or something along those lines.